We both have extremely different experiences with writing for video games. So Justin's going to tell you a little bit about his experiences. I'm going to tell you a little bit about mine. And then we'll start talking about how we went about doing the writing that we do and what opportunities may or may not exist for you and how to approach them.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Justin.
The quick version is I wrote on such games as Telltale's Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, Minecraft Story Mode, and Tales from the Borderlands. And then I went off to a mobile company where I worked on Marvel Avengers Academy, which was quite fun. Then I've done some weird other projects that are experimental in nature, such as GenVid's Rival Peak, which is with DJ2, who produced like Sonic, and they're doing some other, they just got approved for Streets of Rage to become a movie or TV show, so that's exciting. And then more recently, we did a Silent Hill thing as well, so fun stuff coming.
I started my career at TSR, the venerable maker of Dungeons & Dragons. Worked there for about 14 years making D&D products, and then transitioned into video games. Went to work for Bethesda Softworks, where I worked on Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, Oblivion. I was the lead designer for Skyrim. I worked on Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, 76, and Starfield. I left the company. I'm retired now. During Starfield, so I know some things about it, but not all, and I can't talk about any of them. Let me say that again. Any of them. And now I'm a budding novelist, so we have extremely different experiences in the video game industry, where I was writing more from the inside and Justin was writing a little more from the outside. So why don't you go ahead and describe some details of some of the things that you did, the writing process, and the kinds of writing that you did for video games.
Yeah, and I'll say that I also am a novelist and screenwriter, and that all comes into play here. So when I was, go back a step too. So I did the whole military thing. I was in the government, and I was at the Federal Reserve Bank, and I was looking at assets and liquidity analysis and doing Asia policy papers, and I was going, what the hell? What have I done with my life? Yes, exactly. I'm like, why am I here? So I just started going hardcore on LinkedIn to look for ways, and we can talk more about like the break-in in later, but I ended up at Telltale Games, and I walked in the door, and so I started writing because I love the Game of Thrones books, and so I walk in the door and see all the posters on the wall for Game of Thrones, which they hadn't announced yet, and I just started doing the little happy dance in my mind, but pretended to be cool about it, like, all right, yeah, cool. And so it was like a dream come true. And so then the actual process, like so you guys are probably wondering, some of you probably know, but like we were talking about how it's so different. At Telltale, it's very much a writer's room. So we would get together a lot of writers from Hollywood. They'd be bringing in people who are working on HBO shows and who just finished the Disney Fellowship and whatnot. And we would get anywhere from 3 to 10 people in a room and just start whiteboarding. And we would do that for anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months, depending on the game. And then we'd break out from there, and we'd go off, and you'd pair a writer with a narrative designer. And so I was a writer, the narrative designer. We can get more into the character part of it, but the way we looked at it was the narrative designer is more focused on the player side of the story, and then the writer is more focused on the character side of the story, if that makes sense. I know I talk fast sometimes and also say things that might not be clear, but that basically just means like when I'm writing, I'm thinking, okay, is Clementine the type of person who would say this and would do this? And then the other one's thinking, but would the player want her to be doing that? And does that make sense for them in that moment? And all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so that was basically the process. They would pair us up, and we can go through a whole bunch of like what the tool looks like. And if we run out of time today, you can ask me in the lobby or at a bar. But we had our proprietary tool. We would go through all these choice moments. Telltale Games, if you haven't heard about it, is very much a choice-based, pretty much just like watching a movie. So you're like watching the scenes play through, and then they'll pop up with choices, and you pick the choice, and then the character says something. And we have this whole fun thing about, Clem, we'll remember that. And then that later pops up, hopefully, in a way that's like, oh, that thing you did now totally screwed you over, or totally rewarded you, or even better, rewarded you a little bit and screwed you over a little bit, which is more fun. And so, yeah, so I can dive a lot more into that, but did you want to take a little bit here?
Yeah, a couple things to pull out of what he just said, and hopefully you'll return the favor to me when I'm going on and on. Every studio works differently. There is no consistency in this industry. The tool that we used at Bethesda Softworks was custom. The tools he used were custom. The process is custom. Even the roles for the writers and how they use the writing is completely different from studio to studio. There is no consistency. This sucks for you guys. I mean, there's no way around that. It makes things very, very difficult when you want to write for a video game or video game company. You have to first figure out what it is they do, because what he just described is alien to me, completely and utterly alien. At Bethesda Softworks, we had no writers. We had designers, and that's what I was. I was a senior designer and lead designer. And a designer was responsible for all aspects of what we called a quest. And the quest would include the story elements, the dialogue, managing the movement from place to place, doing the scripting, laying out the rewards, the mechanics of the treasures, all of that, and all in one tight little bundle. That designer is responsible for all of it. So writing was actually just a small part of his job, and he was responsible for mostly dialogue, but also whatever narration was necessary. And there isn't a lot of narration because the player activities in a free-form game, as opposed to a choice-based game, the player's very open. The narration is whatever the player decides to do. If he goes to the left door, the right door, straight ahead, or spins around in circles and looks at the ceiling, that's his business. It's not your business as the writer anymore. So extremely different experiences.
Yeah, and I'll also say, yeah, so like we have the proprietary tools, and then a lot of places write in Excel, and that's annoying, as many writers can attest to. And then sometimes Final Draft, so for screenwriters in the group. And to go back a step too, the way I broke in on my first step was that I had some screenplays written, and that's what they wanted to see. So being versed in Final Draft, knowing how to use Excel, and then being flexible and what kind of platform you're going to use is all going to be very helpful in that regard.
Right. So how many people here are thinking that they would like to get into writing for video games? Show of hands. Has anyone here actually written for video games in any capacity? Oh, cool. We have a couple people. Okay. When we get to the Q&A, I'd love to hear your experiences, because I'll bet you dimes to dollars they are different than our experiences. And I would love to hear what those differences are and allow the audience to hear about them as well. You want to take next topic, or you want me to go next?
You can start.
Okay. So for Bethesda, we had a ton of dialogue that was written, and this formed the vast majority of the actual writing. Yeah, we also wrote the books, which would be narrative, and there were journals and quest targets and all that kind of stuff that was narrative, but really the core of it was the dialogue. So that was the style of writing that we all ended up mastering. But the dialogue is a little bit odd because it's choice-based. So when you go to talk to a character, actually before I get too detailed here, how many people have played Skyrim or Fallout or some other Bethesda game? Now let's strike that. How many people have not? Okay, that's a little easier for me to digest. So you would approach a character and you'd click on them, and the game would make up a line for you to say. Or you'd go and click up on them and they would say something to you, but somehow there would be what we would call a hello line. One character says it to the other, and there's no choice involved. The click happens, boom, and there's that line of dialogue. Then the choices appear, and you as the writer have to make all those choices. So you are not in control of the emotional state, or even sometimes the narrative state of the character totally, because you want to make those choices broad. You want to have the choice of, hey, I need help, please can you help me? And the choice of, go away, I'm grumpy, or whatever else it may happen to be. And you want to have a variety of those. So the player feels like they're making choices. The player feels like they're making meaningful choices. And yes, I know many of our choices were not as meaningful as you would have liked, and I'm sorry, and don't hate me. Okay, so you hate me anyway, I got it. And then you have to write custom responses to each of those. So it's already varying dramatically from a novel or a short story where you're in control of your character arc. Here, the character arcs are swimming all over the place. You know, the left, right, you know, happy, sad, angry, all the different kinds of emotions or responses. But because the game needed to be able to progress, we had a system where we we didn't have a term for it, but what we did is we would fold everything back into these nexus points. So I might walk up to a character, and the character would say, hey, I need help. And my responses could be, oh, certainly, what can I do for you? Or, I'm really busy, why don't you just go away? Or, will you pay me for it? So I have those three basic responses, and no matter what choice I selected, somehow later on it all had to fold back into the, okay, I'm going to do this for you. And then it would branch again, and then it would fold back in. And so the places where it folded in would form these junctions that would dictate the overall story, which had to remain constant. So somehow you had to take the player on this journey of, yeah, he intimidated the guy into doing it, or he just bribed him, or he just was a nice guy, but at the end of the day, I'm still going to do it. And then you just keep folding these things back in. It's a very strange way to write. Anybody here who hasn't written that, it's weird. It's not even the same as Choose Your Own Adventure, because they celebrate the fact that you spread off into all these directions and you never come back again, whereas we were forced to fold things back. How does that contrast to what you had to do?
Yeah, and I can say that that's kind of a part where we were very similar at Telltale. And so at Telltale, it was a lot of that. We probably branched out a little bit more than what you guys did, because that's part of the fun, is like you kill Kenny or you kill this other character, a new woman who just appeared in the story versus this character.
Kenny, please, can we kill Kenny? Kenny has to
Different
die.
Kenny. But yeah, so a character who you've been with for a long time in your journey, who's kind of trusted, but recently did something really bad, or this new character who's kind of a little more in line with you. So like the game I'm referencing is The Walking Dead Season 2, and you're playing as this little girl, Clem, and then there's this character who's a woman who you just met, and so you kind of have this affinity, and she seems more trustworthy, but there's this moment where they fighting each other, and you have I think you have a pistol, I forget, but you have to choose, are you going to shoot one or the other? And like that's such a big moment that then impacts what's going to happen next. But of course, we also have production constraints, and that's going to be a big part of like the team that you're working in, and very different from writing a novel in that sense. But because of that, we try to put as many of these towards the later parts of the game, so that if it branches out big, at least it's only one more episode left to write with that crazy stuff going.
You'll notice in video games, big choices happen just before the game ends.
Yeah.
That's where they all end.
And now you have 16 different
Oh,
endings,
yeah.
but only because of that one last thing.
Yep.
But hopefully if you have a good program where you can do all those if-then things, like if that happened, then this happened, then you can have all that cool stuff start playing out there, and like you see, oh, that choice made that happen this way because of that, and that's a lot of fun. There's a lot of great games out there, like Fallen Rain, and what's the...
Fallen Rain's great.
Yeah, I love Fallen Rain.
I mean Fallen Rain or Heavy Rain?
Oh, Heavy Rain. Is it
Heavy Rain.
Yes, yes.
Heavy Rain.
Heavy Rain. So, and then so many great ones that have these fun choices. But I just played one recently called Trek to Yomi, which is not super in that way, but the whole game is just kind of a side scroller, but really fun and really gets you into the zone of like an old Japanese cinematic, like a Kurosawa film. And then there's like one choice or two choices somewhere in there, and then that gives you multiple endings. But it's just fun, like that they can put these little bits in there. But to go back a step, one way that we did it at Telltale is just to give you more of a sense of like what it really feels like to be writing this, is we'd get together with the narrative designer, and he'd put together these things we called stubs, where just like a high-level outline kind of, where you have like a circle, and then like it goes out to another circle, and then in there they'd put up like a couple words of like, we want to accomplish this here, and we want to accomplish this here. And then the writer would go in and flesh it out, and then the designer would come back in and look over it and give notes. And so it's this whole process of how we would approach these different dialogue choices and these moments, so we could see it all in one big picture and be able to look through and go, okay, here's how this is impacting this, and this is impacting that. But to give another side of what dialogue writing might be like at mobile, and this is where I learned that, at least in this sense, mobile wasn't for me. Sometimes you might just be writing just dialogue. And so you'll have two characters. You'll have Captain America and Black Widow. They meet each other, and then what are some quick exchanges they could have? And you write like 3 or 4 versions of that. And then, okay, now Captain America meets this other character. And so for that experience, all that was is like, okay, some more jokes, some more silly quippy things, some more jokes. And I was like, I can't do this for 10 years. I'm going to go insane. And likewise on this Rival Peak thing that I was doing, it's a very different one where it's like this massively online event where everybody can vote to get at the same time on things. So totally different from Telltale, but still with that idea in mind. And on that, it was like that. So we have to do all these dialogue exchanges, but it was weird because you don't know when these characters are going to interact with each other. So you have to think about these AI characters that are walking around on the screen. If they're talking to each other, but they're not anywhere near each other, or one's chopping wood and the other one's like yelling at them, but they're way over there, it doesn't make any sense. So you have to think about all these weird things as you're coming up with this dialogue that you wouldn't in a novel.
And that's, for us, I don't know if it was the case for you, we, as designers, would have to put in the the script variables and the if-then statements, and we had special forms to do this with, but we had to lay down all that logic. We would have to say, he'll say this, but not if you're chopping wood, and then we'd have to have the character who's chopping wood be marked as, oh, he's chopping wood right now, and we have to have that flag set and then unset, and we'd have to manage all of that. I don't know if that was the case for your projects, but it was something we had to do.
Not on that one, but at Telltale, and I enjoy doing that stuff a lot, like because it's kind of like you're solving the puzzles, you know. If you have that kind of mindset, like you like to play games, which is another benefit of working in games, is that then you're always researching. So I always tell my wife when I'm playing Mass Effect or whatever, it's like it's okay, it's for work.
Here's the flip side, because I'm sure Justin gets it too. Oh, you get to play games all day long. That must be a wonderful wonderful job. Yes. For 2 years, I played Skyrim in a broken state. Now, before you get on my ass about this, because everybody says Skyrim is still in a broken state, and you are at least not wrong, it was more broken. And I had to play it, and I put in 200 to 300 hours of a broken game for 2 years. And I'm sure Justin had similar experiences. You'd play the game broken over and over and over and over.
And I think we're touching on something interesting, though, the turnaround time. So, like with Skyrim, I imagine you said multiple years, probably 5, 3, somewhere in that range. A lot of these games take 3, 5 years, something like, so you'll be working at certain studios like AAA, where you'll work there for 5 years and you'll have 1 credit. Versus, Telltale was just busting stuff out left and right. So they were getting out. You would be writing on an episode, and then you'd see it live in the store like 2 months later sometimes.
And you were working licensed properties, which means you don't control the characters.
Yeah.
We got to control our own characters, but you had to follow whatever the characters were.
You think would be making
property.
it easier, right? But yeah. So then we can talk about that character side of it as well. But yeah, I mean, on the character note, like I think that is something that's interesting, is like working in other people's IP. There's some other panels here that already talked about that in terms of novels, and I've done that. My big break was when I started writing with Michael Anderle. You're now writing with Craig Martell, and so we do a lot of that. But in the game world, that's something to really think about. Like even if it's your own characters, you're still writing in the mind of the studio exec or whoever is above you in that case. Who are you working for? Like who would be the person to tell you, no, that doesn't fit?
Well, as the lead designer, I got to be the one telling them, so that was fortunate. Except when Todd Howard decided to join the conversation, which happened fairly often.
So we'd have a thing.
Todd trumps everybody.
We'd have a thing where we would try to say it's like paint by numbers, but you have no idea where the numbers are. So you're trying to guess where the boss wants the numbers, and you're trying to put the red there and the pink there and the blue there. And then he comes in, he's like, "No, that's not right." But where are the numbers? Go do another draft. But where are the numbers? And they just never tell you where the numbers are. So
we gave the individual designers a fair amount of autonomy with their characters. The problem would come in with the main quest, because that's where Todd would want to have the most say, or in overall tone. Every game product, there's going to be a tone that has to be managed. You look at The Walking Dead, the way they talk, simple things like the level of cursing, what kinds of things do they talk about. You look at the Elder Scrolls, the same thing. We have different standards for the way things are written. You can look at a piece of dialogue and say, that doesn't feel like Elder Scrolls. And sometimes I can't even quantify it. I just know after years and years and years of doing this, that's just not right. You need to rewrite that line. It doesn't feel right.
On that note, I'll just say with like the choice space and stuff. So like because both of our games had a lot to do with choice space, or most of the games I worked on had to do with choice space, and I think that's important to note too. Is like thinking about like maybe the player wants to do something, but it very much, of course, has to be in. And this might be common sense, but it has to be in the mind of the character, the character that you're playing, right? So you can't. If you have your 3 choices, you have to have something that works for Clementine or for whatever character you're writing there. And then we would do a thing that we called rails. So like if you have a character, as an example of something that Jason and I were working on for PlanetQuest, which is my shirt I'm wearing, we would have these rails of this pirate lady. And so it was like Survivor, by the book, and something else that I forget right now. But so like each time that you have a choice, you try to think, okay, this choice right here, she's going to have 3 very different reactions, but we want them to fall into one of those so that we can explain how that fits into the character that we're writing right now.
Yeah, major characters all had a description, usually accessible on an internal wiki, They almost always were compared to a movie or TV character, which I found a little interesting. But
Yeah.
so we would try to write what are they like so that somebody else who's looking at it can see, oh, okay, this book is a hard-bitten cowboy kind of character. Okay, well, he's got to say things like that then, he can't start pouring out his heart and crying because the soup's cold. That's just not going to work for his character archetype.
Going into that, what you just said about the character, so thinking like big picture, what is writing for games again, like what we've talked a little bit, but also, there's all these roles within there, like when you're writing your own novel, you can write character bios if you want to, you don't have to, it's your choice. A lot of the times when you're at a game, it's like we have to get those character bios down so that everybody on the team can be on the same page, and so that might be part of your job. We did a lot of treatments, like at one company, at the Silent Hill one, we had to send treatments off to Japan for, who is it, Konami?
I don't remember.
Okay, whoever did Silent Hill, I think Konami, right? So we had to do treatments for them to be able to see what it was. So that's part of the job there, is like putting the treatments together and then doing the pitches, sometimes verbally, sometimes just on the page in an email or something. And so these are all parts of like writing for games that might fall under your purview as a writer. Or at some places I've been, they start to think, okay, everybody wears multiple hats, so you're the writer, write this stupid copy thing if they don't have enough copywriters or marketers or whatever. So that'll happen as well at times. But that never happened at Telltale, and so I will give them credit on that.
Licensed characters can be interesting. Back in the early days when I was at TSR, we did an Indiana Jones game. And one of the questions we put to the Spielberg team was, what languages does Indiana Jones speak? Because we needed to know. He speaks every language on Earth except for that one Indian language, I don't remember the name, it begins with an N, that he couldn't speak in the movie. Every other language on Earth, every single one, except the one that he runs into the Indians on in the movie. That was their reply to us. So you get strange things back with licensed properties. Let me talk a little about the type of dialogue writing and the constraints on it, because I'm looking at our clock here and seeing that, I'd like to give you guys plenty of time to ask questions. When you're writing a novel, your reader gets a lot of face time with your characters, or at least your principal characters. There's a lot of dialogue that your reader experiences. I would have a major character, you might hear a dozen lines of dialogue, maybe. And on top of that, those lines of dialogue all have to be short and pithy, because frequently the player is reading at the same time as he's listening, and they will read and they'll get ahead of what they're hearing, and they don't want it to go on forever. They want it short. They want to get on with it. They got a game to play here. I got someone to kill. My gun's out of bullets. That's what their mindset is. They want to move on. So everything's got to be short. You don't want to go more than 3 challenge responses in dialogue. Yes, it happens. Yes, it happened more than unfrequently. But that's kind of the goal. And so you had very little face time with major characters, and in that face time, you have to convey a sense of who they are, why they're special, and all these other unique things about them. It's a very different kind of dialogue writing than a novelist would be used to.
Yeah, I'd also add on like to the choice space thing. I think there's an interesting note on that, like where you're trying to capture in the choices, like where we always had it would be like 2 or 3 words to try to capture what they would say in that sentence, and making sure that that represents what that's going to be, so you don't confuse the player and make them think, oh, you just totally robbed my choice from me. Versus I know like Mass Effect was trying to do something where each choice based on where it was would have some kind of meaning to it. And I never caught that when I was playing. I had to watch some YouTube video to figure that out. So I mean, like sometimes we were talking about that at once at Telltale too, like trying to color code things or do some other way to show it. And did you guys do anything like that?
We tried to do that with Fallout 4.
Oh, okay.
It lasted about, I'm retired from the company now. I can tell stories. Stories. We tried to do that, and it was Todd's idea, and we saw what he was trying to do, and what he was trying to do was extremely laudable, but it wasn't working, and it took us a year and a half to persuade him. And a year and a half when you have a 3-year development cycle, that's like a death knell. You're locked in and loaded. But finally he agreed, and we pared it back. But for a while, Fallout 4 was yes, no, maybe, question. Those are the 4 responses you could have. And to this day, if you play Fallout 4, you always have 4 responses because the game was built that way. We couldn't pull that part out. But not everything falls into yes, no, maybe question. So it was changed to yes, no, funny question. And then finally, it was just like, okay, just put 4 things in there, guys, okay? But we'd really like to kind of keep the question. And you kind of have to have a yes line. That's what we would call the shortest line to fulfilling the directives of the quest was the yes line. So when it got tested, the yes line always got tested first. And if the funny line didn't work, okay, we can survive that. But that yes line's got to work. So yeah, I mean, we had that and it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's interesting to like take note of and think about when you're getting in there. One thing I wanted to talk about too was like crunch. I don't know if you wanted to go on to the next thing first or... As an aside, while he debates that, I'll just say like there's definitely like that topic, right? You think about video game companies, you're thinking a lot of times you hear the bad things, which are like crunch and is the pay any good? And these are 2 things I think we can address to certain degrees. I've been hearing rumors lately. This is just it's not me saying it; it's other people saying it. That like in California, anything along like the Burbank area and up and down is safe. Everything like west is like you're probably going to work overboard. So I'm like, oh, interesting, taking notes for myself because I'm not a big fan of crunch. I have 3 kids, I have a family. I'm like, I don't want to be working until 2 in the morning. At Telltale, they closed down, so I can talk about them too, right? So there was definitely some days where I'd be going home, bringing my work home, and working until like midnight, waking up at 4 in the morning, working some more, going back into the office, working. It definitely happens, but I'll note that when I went to Jam City, where they did Marvel Avengers Academy, they were like, don't ever work overboard. If you work longer than 8 hours in a day, tell us because the producers are doing something wrong, and that's on them.
How'd that go?
Woo, that was awesome.
Did it
we
work?
never had a problem with it, yeah.
Wow.
It was great. But, it's mobile, and it's a little less intense. Like, we never had any kind of review system on Jam City games. Like, it was just, you write it, it's there. It's online, like a day later or a week later or something. Versus Telltale review systems is something interesting to talk about because, like what you were talking about the broken game, we would write a version of it, then they'd bring it in and play through the whole version of it with this little guy who like moves around the screen like this and floats, and like broken scenery and stuff like that.
Oh, white boxing's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. So anyway, back on track.
I've lost total track of the track.
Okay.
Let me go to different types of dialogue that I had to deal with. You touched on some of this. We've talked dialogue for quests, but in I don't remember the number anymore, so I'm going to make one up that's close. The 140,000 lines of dialogue in Fallout 4, the 95,000 lines of dialogue in Skyrim. Less than half of that was actual quest-related dialogue, maybe less than a quarter. The vast majority of it were combat lines, what we would call grunts. And they weren't all literally grunts, although there were quite a few grunts, All you have to do is, you let the sound guys deal with that. You didn't have to deal with that. But it'd be like, come at me, I'll kill you, take this.
Also known as barks?
Barks,
okay.
That's another word for it. And I'm going to tie that to something else that doesn't seem like it would be tied to it. And that is, and it's something Justin mentioned earlier, conversations between NPCs. So one NPC walks up to another, how's the weather? Oh, it's crummy like always. That kind of conversation. The thing that ties all of those together is they need to be forgettable. You have to write dialogue that goes in one ear, is registered as, oh, something has been said, and then is immediately forgotten by the listener because it doesn't mean anything. It's nothing. And when you fail, I took an arrow to the knee, it becomes a meme and it becomes a problem. So, and by the way, nobody planned, I took an arrow to the knee. What happens is you've got a designer who is, one of 6 guys writing generic dialogue. His eyes are blurry. It's 11 o'clock at night. He's had too much coffee. Now the coffee's machine broken, and he's trying to come up with 2 more lines that are generic, that will go in one ear and out the other. And he just failed. He succeeded the previous 104 times. He failed when the arrow hit the knee. And this is the vast bulk of the dialogue that is in the Bethesda games. is forgettable dialogue that conveys emotion, it conveys a sense of presence. Those NPCs are there. They feel like real people. I walk by them, they're having a conversation. What were they talking about? I don't know. I don't care. There's a dragon over there. But if they don't talk, you noticed it. You noticed the absence. Remember the old games when NPCs would stand around like this and not say anything until you interacted with them. So I don't know if you want to add on
That's
to
really
that.
interesting. Yeah, I would just say the closest I've experienced with that is idols. Idols means...
That's actually a technical term on the Bethesda side,
Oh,
is
okay,
an
cool.
idol. An idol is something that they do that's not related to another character.
Okay.
So they might be standing there and going, that would be an idol, or, geez, when's he going to come to relieve me? That would be an idol.
So in our case, though, we meant it differently. So when we said idols, it would mean, so at Telltale and also at DJ2, it would mean when somebody asks you a question and you're debating the choice, we wanted the dialogue to keep moving, so they continue with the question, kind of. But it can't be anything that rephrases the question or changes how you're thinking of the question. So that's, it's kind of like what you're talking about, where it kind of has to go in one ear and out the other. So it's like, well, the characters aren't stupid, they're just standing there like, when you ask the question, they're like, come on, don't you want to answer my question? What do you think? You know, like that kind of stuff, where it's very, very simple.
Yeah. We also had to write multiple ways to say the same thing. Because if every time you walk by these two characters, you know, if they say, I've got mud on my shoes, you know, you can't just say that same line. The next time it's got to be, geez, my shoes are really dirty. Oh, wow, I'm going to need to get another pair of shoes. You need to have multiple ways of saying the same thing so that it feels organic. That's most of the dialogue, quite honestly. The quest dialogue is like the, please, could I write quest dialogue? Please, 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 do I not write a bark or a grunt?
Yeah. I'm not a big bark fan. I'm really hoping AI takes over the bark side of it. We'll just put in one line and it'll spit out 30 others. That's my goal for AI involvement in games. I know we have like less than 10 minutes already. Did you want to go into Q&A?
Yeah, we should go into Q&A. I think I hit most of my big points here, but we'll probably cover some in questions.
Yeah, and over beers, we'll probably say more that we haven't been allowed to say here, so.
Go!
So this is Small World. Justin, we met last night at the podium party where you worked with Dave Grossman, and I ended up working with Dave Grossman for years.
Yeah.
I'm an audiobook producer, publisher, narrator, but I obviously am a video game voice as well. So I don't know if you can see my shirt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Fallout Boy.
So the other small world is I've been in every Fallout since New Vegas.
Which characters?
Basically, 75% of the ghouls in New Vegas.
Okay.
I'm known for Hannibal, the stand-up comic in the Four Tops,
Okay, got to give us a line.
with the one-liners.
Come on, do
He's
the
like,
line.
well, he's all, well, I can just talk like this all night long if you want me to. Like,
There you go. That's good enough.
Hey
Okay.
there-
What's
hey
your
there,
what's your
Smooth
question? What's your question?
you had mentioned about writing, in video games. So I am on a current Bethesda game. I can't talk
Which
about
shall
it.
be not
I
named.
can't talk about it. But for the first time in my life, it might be in space. The first time in my life, they had me testing. So we were able to spitball. And so we were working on
cool.
like building the character in the session and then going back to the writing team. And then once they loved what we did, they came back and it was, we cleaned up. But they actually took my input in that.
As a writer, I would sit in and listen and provide commentary on voices, and it would be a rare thing, but occasionally we would change dialogue. So it sounds like they're getting much more input from you guys. That's
Yeah,
cool.
it was great. And last thing, I also narrated the TSR story for John
Did you
Peterson.
really?
Yeah, about Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and how they, their interplay for years. So that came out for Tantor last year. So that was, being a gamer, that was a pleasure to read as well. So, small world.
Small world, small world. Yes, ma'am.
I know nothing of game mechanics, complete confession. I come to this from the perspective of I'm a novelist and I'm looking to go into the game world. And so how do you make that decision on whether you go RPG, tabletop, or video game? And if you're looking at video game, what is it what elements do you guys, like as designers, look for in a story or a series that tells you, okay, yeah, this is video game material?
Yeah. So, I think this would go to a question of breaking in, and this is one of my things I always try to stress in every talk is like being available for opportunity. And I think part of it is you can't plan it per se. So like get ready. I had my samples. I was ready to submit them. I made sure I was like watching YouTube videos of top games and then like trying to play at least an hour or two of them so I'd know what it is if I didn't have 30 hours to play it. But then like I just saw a posting a couple days ago for an entry-level remote tabletop writer. And then if you get on these Facebook groups, there's one called Game Writers, and they just post these announcements. There's also a Discord on them. And then you'll just see them and you apply, and if you get the opportunity and they like you, you make the argument of why you're the perfect person for that job and you've been doing it your whole life and preparing for this moment, and it kind of happens. But it's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's got to be tailored.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to tailor
Unfortunately,
your,
it has to be
retailer
tailored
that
to
resume.
not just the industry, to the company.
Okay.
And that's, it's a bad answer, but it's the,
No, it's okay. I
it's the
appreciate
right
it.
answer,
Thank you.
unfortunately.
But you also mentioned kind of like how do they know your materials, right, or something, which sounds like you're talking about trying to pitch or make your own, which is a whole other topic. Because like
And
most,
I don't want to write it. I want to go to experts to do the game
Right.
stuff and be like, here's the source material.
yeah, and a simple answer is that no studio that I know of takes pitches. You
Okay.
can shape stories sometimes when you're in there. Like my episode of Minecraft Story Mode was purely me. I was like, let's do this whole thing and do it like this and bring in these YouTube stars. And they're like, sweet. And then they did it. But there's never a chance where I'm like, here's my story that I want you guys to make. That like doesn't happen, right?
And it's also very rare that a studio will hire someone from the outside to write their main story. No, they will hire people that they think are good for their company, and they will tell them to write the main story.
Sure.
And then they may hire an outside writer for some smaller pieces, you know, like we want this character written, or we want to have these scenes written, but they won't say, we'd like to make a cool video game, let's go hire a writer to do that. That's really rare.
Thank you.
We have 5 minutes left, so.
Well, my question might have been kind of answered by that, because I've always identified as a gamer, but I'm really someone who, I live for the cutscenes. I'm more about the story. I can watch someone play a video game, and I just want to watch the storyline. I live in the Seattle area, and there's tons of video game companies, but I've always been intimidated by the idea of like even applying because I don't have any coding experience. Do you recommend that like for a person who wants to write story for a video game, should they have coding experience or does that matter?
If you want to work as a writer in the video game industry, you need to pick your companies, you need to download their public tools, and you need to produce something in those public tools. Now, that's my experience coming from the AAA space. Justin's going to have probably a different answer, but they want to, I'm going to get on my high horse for a second. Companies are risk adverse. The best way to get a job at any company is to prove you can do the job. And you do that by doing the job. You want to become a quest writer for Bethesda? Write a quest in their tool. Suddenly their manager's like, phew, I don't have to worry. That person proved it. So get their tool, do something in their tool. You'll know if you want to do it, etc.
And if you just look at all the job applications that are out there, you can see what they want. Sometimes now they want Unreal Engine familiarity with Blueprint.
Yeah,
And
you don't need
that's-
to be a programmer. Don't worry about
Yeah,
that.
definitely not programming, and very rarely. Like maybe designers sometimes need Unity or something else, but as far as a
A little,
writer,
yeah.
I would say just apply, but mostly go to GDC, Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, meet the recruiters there, say, hey, I did this cool thing. For example, at Telltale, we hired a guy because he specifically wanted to get into Telltale, got a job at Pocket Gems, working on one of their like teen girl, very silly, sorry, not to demean them. I wasn't a big fan of those ones because I tried writing for it and I could not stand it. But he did it for like 6 months just to prove he could do choices so that when he talked to the recruiter, he said, I did this, I love Telltale, please hire me, and then they did. And so it's all about finding some way to prove it, even if it's not that cool or you don't think you're ready for it, it doesn't hurt to apply and try to network like crazy.
Okay. Thank you. Last two, we're going to try and rapid fire so that we can get it in under the wire here. Yes.
Oh, no, rapid fire. Mine's not really built for that, but.
Well, then you come see us afterward if you think you want a long answer.
Maybe a short answer you have for me. You talked a lot about dialogue. I'm such a sucker for found documentation. Arcane Studios Prey is one of my favorite games. With the terminals in, Fallout. Who wrote those? Who planned those? Was it very similar to dialogue, or
The same people who write the dialogue.
Okay.
Bethesda's an equal opportunity mayhem provider.
Great.
So you got to write the dialogue, then you got to write the terminals, then you have to write the books that are found in Elder Scrolls, and all that stuff falls to the same staff.
Awesome, thanks.
And feel free to come up and ask questions afterward. I'll be available for a few minutes. I don't know what
For
the
sure.
schedule
We'll
is.
probably be
Yes,
at
go
some
ahead.
bar.
I'm wondering if you guys can talk about writing novels in a video game universe or based off of a video game, because I know that happens a lot.
It's funny because we were talking about that right before a little
Yeah, we
bit.
were.
So like my current job for PlanetQuest, they're building a game and they hired me to write 3 novels to establish the IP before. So there's like weird opportunities
That's
like
unusual,
that.
by the way.
Yeah.
That is not normal.
And the reason they did that is because they saw the pedigree of like the credits that I have, and then that helps them get their investors more excited. And so there's weird opportunities like that can pop up, and I'm, like I say, always think outside the box, see what's out there. And as far as the other side of it, I don't really know much, and I was asking him.
One of my good friends is Troy Denning, who writes Halo and Star Wars novels, and he had to establish his credentials as a well-respected author, writing Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance books, and then he was able to tap into that market. A lot of times they come to him now for it. It's not an easy market to get into, but you can definitely do it. But first you need to establish yourself as an author that writes the kinds of things that they are interested in.
Thanks.
What's our time?
3
3 minutes left. Oh, my goodness. Somebody ask us a question. Yes, I'm wearing underwear.
So you asked anybody who'd written in games. I did some indie stuff.
Oh, that's
way long
right.
time
We
ago.
had that question. I forgot about that. Thank you.
And so it's not all that interesting, except, I wrote a quest, but it was a very structured format. My thinking now, or my question now for you is, you talked about how you branch out, you come back to these nodes, right? And that makes a whole lot of sense. Except, doesn't the player then still end up feeling railroaded? And how much...
Have you played our games?
I have. That's true. They're big enough. How much planning do you do ahead of time of where those nodes are? Like, do you come into the room saying, okay, here's what the overall arc's going to be, here's where they're going to start, here's where they're going to end, now fill it out?
Yeah.
Or do you start at the beginning and say, we don't
The
really know
Bethesda
them?
process, Justin will have to speak to his own, is you write only the yes line. What I described before is the yes line. You write it as if the player has no choice. He'll do this, then he'll do this, then he'll do this. That goes through reviews, gets approved, they tell you to change things, everybody agrees on it. Once that is done, then you start looking at the branching. And I made it sound like the branching is totally irrelevant. It's not. If you piss a guy off earlier, that may affect dialogue later. We have capabilities to do that. It may affect the rewards you get, but it all has to be minor stuff. It can't be the actual entire plot unless you get approval in advance from the leads, which does happen on occasion. You know of quests where there's real branching. So I think I've answered your question. I got
I'll
off
just
track.
add, the way we would do that, it was very complicated. We would do the whole pitch. So we'd have to get the whole thing and pitch it to a room full of like half of this many people, and they'd be like throwing out random thoughts, and not all of them are super experienced. But what was really frustrating is when we would do that outline, and they'd pair up like a junior writer with a junior designer, and if like neither of you know what you're doing, it's gonna be a very complicated process. And we ran into that a few times where they would just have like the exact same number of everything in there, and it doesn't feel like there's good pacing or anything. And so the writer gets it, and I'm like, and then you have to think, and this is something else about the teamwork that we can get into, because we don't have time later, is like, how do you balance this whole teamwork thing? How do you balance people stabbing each other in the backs, or trying to be a team player and know that your performance review is coming up, and all that stuff. And
That's a whole other animal.
stuff.
Was there anybody else who has worked for a video game company as a writer that wanted to share their experiences? We probably have about a minute left. No? Okay, thank you very much. I always appreciate more because, as we've said before, every company is different, so everybody's experience is completely different.
We were intentionally mimicking the old Bardsdale games, and so
Okay.
very structured.
Okay. Thank you, guys. It's been a
Yeah,
wonderful
thank you.
experience.
Thank you.
I think we came in just under a minute there somewhere.